Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's New in Historical Fiction. I'm your host, Colin Mustfull, the founder of History Through Fiction. What's New in Historical Fiction is a regular panel series that brings on historical novelists with new and upcoming titles. We try to do this about every month or two, so I'm glad you joined us, and hopefully you can join us for future panels. Before I introduce our panelists, just a couple housekeeping things. So first of all, you can turn your mics or your cameras on or off if you'd like. Your mics are disabled just to avoid any distractions, but you can interact with us in the chat. So please say hello at any point. Let us know where you're joining us from. If you have any questions for the panelists, I will monitor the chat for those, and I will specifically ask for questions as we get towards the end of the panel. I also have a landing page with our panelists' novels, which I'm going to post in the chat right now. You can go there and find each one of our panelists' novels and find out more about those books, and then those get linked back to bookshop.org because we want to support independent booksellers. If you buy a book from bookshop.org, they give a portion of the sales to an independent bookstore. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to leave the screen here and then we'll introduce our panelists. So first of all, we have Vanessa Riley, author of Fire, Sword, and Sea. Vanessa, if you could say hello and let us know a little bit about your novel.
Hello, everybody. I'm Vanessa Riley, and this is Fire, Sword, and Sea. It comes out next week. We're 5 days away. Um, this is about women in the Caribbean that were pirates who decided they didn't want the construct of being a wife or a winch. They wanted a third way out. They ended up picking up swords to do that. So this is Fire, Sword, and Sea about the true history of pirates in the Caribbean.
Thank you, Vanessa. Next, we have Gabriella Saab, author of, now I skips my mind here, Star Society. That's right. I had you on the podcast. I put you up on historythroughfiction.com, and then I couldn't remember it when I needed to. Go
That
ahead,
is totally
Gabriella.
fine. Hi, my name is Gabriella Saab. I'm the author of The Star Society, which just released on Tuesday. So she is brand spanking new. And this is a story set in the 1940s, post-war in Hollywood. It is about two sisters who are twins. One, her name is Ada. She is an actress, and the other is Ingrid, and she is a private investigator hired by the House Un-American Activities Committee to investigate allegations of communism in the entertainment industry, her primary target of whom is none other than her sister. And the two lost touch during World War II. They grew up in the Netherlands, and as things happen during war, they get separated and each fear the worst. So this is how they reunite in this backdrop of the rise of the Red Scare. And through that process, they reconnect. They try to decide, can they trust each other anymore? What's all going on, and all these things that are happening. And then some secrets and some trouble from their past arises and leads them on a Nazi hunt. So that is the Star Society. It is available everywhere now in ebook, audio, hardback, and paperback.
Thank you, Gabriella. Next, we have Nancy Bernhard, author of The Double Standard Sporting House. Nancy, hi.
Hi. The Double Standard Sporting House. Sporting House is a brothel. This is a book about an elite brothel in New York City in 1868. And the extraordinary women who make a decision, much like Vanessa was saying, that that being respectable is not as freeing and lucrative as being in the sex trade. Not that they've made it there voluntarily, but they come together to fight against the Tammany Hall political syndicate, which is trafficking young girls. A familiar story, unfortunately, these days.
Thank you, Nancy.
Oh, and it comes out a week from Tuesday, the 20th of January.
And finally, we have Karla Cruz, who is a history through fiction author, and her novel is The Water Lilies of Mishipeshu. Karla, hi.
Hi, here's my novel right here, and I really love the cover and what Colin has been able to do with it. And mine is about 300 years of Great Lakes history. And basically, the question is, how did we get here? So when you look at accounts from early settlers and early explorers, they describe just the superabundance of this area, all the wildlife, the pristine waterways, the dense forest. And clearly, the landscape has altered over time. And it's changed because of urbanization, industrialization, agriculture, all those things have changed. And it's not just in the Great Lakes, it's all over. So, what I'm doing is I went back and I sort of traced the ecological history. And I did that through a botanical manuscript. So, a botanical manuscript was written in the 18th century at a fort that's just about 7 miles away from where I'm sitting right now. And in that botanical history, there is a recipe. And the recipe in there that is being sought for and is being fought over is a dangerous recipe because it's hallucinogen. It's a hallucinogen that's made out of water lilies. And the water lilies can either give people a life-altering vision or it can kill you. So that's the story with lots of other
There's
details.
quite a disparity there between the two extremes. Karla, we've worked together now for a year probably, and I don't think I've ever asked you the factual history behind this botanical manuscript. How much of it did you imagine? How much of it is real?
So it's quite common in Native American societies to have a teacher plant. And with that teacher plant, you have these experiences. They're liminal experiences. You take the plant, so it gives you it's a drug-induced state, and it puts you in a condition where you're sensitive to the other world. So things supernatural. So that's the idea behind it. And there were botanical manuscripts at this time period. So there were botanical manuscripts. Was there one that actually had a recipe for water lilies? Well, no. There's something that's very much like that, but not exactly like this.
I was very curious. I never even thought about where that idea came from that kind of drives this whole story.
No.
Well, let's go to Vanessa. Vanessa, you and I have already talked about this, but nobody else knows that because I haven't published the conversation yet. Uh, Tell us about Jacot Delahi. I'm butchering that, I'm sure, and how you discovered her story.
Well, well, I had like I am even though my father's from Trinidad and Tobago, uh, my mother's here from the South, and I had a Southern French teacher, so it's really screwed up. And Robin Miles, who does the audiobook, she schooled me. So it's Jacot Delahi. Jacot
Ooh.
Delahi. Jacot Delahi is a pirate from the 1600s, and to find her, I actually had to research more of her contemporaries. So there are Anne de Leveut, Michel Le Bosque. These are primarily French or Spanish pirates that are well known during this particular era. And they are friends of her. So she's like a little snippet in different manuscripts talking about these people. Because oftentimes when you try and find women of color, black women, it is extremely difficult because he who writes history decides what's important and what's not. And so women in general are pretty much, it's very like, it is such a blessing that we have Anne Frank's diary to think about the magnitude of being able to hear that story. So when you go back in time, where once again women only had two roles, you were either going to be a wench or a wife. Um, this is this is the construct. So to find her, it was a lot of what's going on in the world in 1650 and 1675 and 1680 and 1698, and putting all the pieces almost like 3D chess, putting all those pieces back together to give you a snapshot of her life, the life of women pirates during this time frame. It's a muscular read, so if you're into battles and bombs and blasts, it's all there. I'm very excited about this, and I'm hoping that we hear conversations about women's choices, about leadership, about resistance, as we talk about Fire, Sword, and Sea.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like a fun read, and as well as being an important read. It looks like one of our attendees, Jane, is also writing a pirate tale set in the South China Sea. Gabriella, let's go to you. Your novel takes place in the Netherlands, is it? Can you tell us about the bombing that took place there, the attack that and kind of sparked your story?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So this story, The Star Society, is loosely inspired by Audrey Hepburn's life. When I was a little girl, I fell in love with her and her films. I would watch them at my grandma's house, and ever since I was 6 years old, I've just been so fascinated by her. And when I get interested in something, I'm a historical author. What do? We research. So even when I was little, I was looking up, facts about her life and outside of the actress and the movies. Of course, I loved all those too, but I wanted to know what was the real person like, which led me to her early life. And I discovered that she grew up in the Netherlands. She was born in Brussels, Belgium, but her family, she had a Dutch mother and a British father. They were Dutch nobles, but they had no money anymore. They had, they were normal. They weren't destitute, but just living normal lives. But they had all these big old ancestral homes in Arnhem and Velp. And so she grew up there, and she went to boarding school in Kent and spent the war years in the Netherlands, in Holland, which now is no longer Holland, but collectively the Netherlands. Um, and so the Netherlands fell in May of 1940. And basically, of course, we know the war began in 1939. The Netherlands felt initially relatively secure because they thought, Hitler's not worried about us. We're fine. Turns out they were not fine. Surprise, surprise. So their security had kind of been eroding over time. And then they only lasted 5 days before they fell. So the Netherlands fell, and Audrey Hepburn, there's a wonderful book about her early life called Dutch Girl, by Robert Matson. And she describes, just sitting upstairs. She was about 10 years old at that time, watching the soldiers just coming in droves down the street. And so, yeah, I was first of all very fascinated by her experience there, and the fact that it led me to the Netherlands during World War II, because I'd learned, we hear a lot about France during World War II or America or England, but I was not that familiar with the Dutch experience. So this was an opportunity for me to explore that through fiction, to explore that through Audrey Hepburn's experience herself. She was a ballerina. She wanted to become a professional dancer. But at this time, of course, she's a little girl. She's about 10 years old, 12 years old. And she spends the whole war at home in Arnhem and Velp. They weren't liberated until, the very end, of course. And during that time, she worked for the Dutch resistance. They had what they called blackout performances, where they would dance and perform for an audience sympathetic to the cause. And they had no lights, a single light so they could see. No music. It was just all very quiet, so they wouldn't be discovered. But that was a way she helped to raise money for Jewish people who were trying to flee for the Dutch resistance, who was aiding, downed pilots and helping people who were suffering from the strict rationing, things like that. She was a courier who delivered messages, and I was just very fascinated to look into, what kind of experience that would have been like, and to then become such a public figure, arguably one of the best known actresses of all time. And she was not a person who liked the spotlight. She was very quiet, very introverted. And so I was just really, really curious to know, why did someone who did not like the spotlight choose to be there? And how had those early experiences shaped her, and how had she carried those with her? So I got to explore that in a fictional way through the Star Society.
It's quite amazing to hear everything that she went through, and yeah, we wouldn't know anything about it. We just see her in the films. We don't get to know that character background, so that's pretty cool. Well, Nancy, let's go to you. You mentioned the double standard is a brothel. I'm curious to know about the political power and social significance of this place at that time.
Sure. Well, this is the height of the Tammany Hall political syndicate. If you're unfamiliar with Tammany, it was um, like at least as bad as MAGA, if not worse, for corruption and exploitation of women, certainly, and just wild embezzlement. And also at the street level, it worked like a gang, right? So they would, especially in any vice industry, they would be taking kickbacks and controlling it. And at this moment in history, the sex trade had been controlled by women, and Tammany decides it's going to take it over. So my heroine, Doc Hastings, who runs the house as a way to fund her clinic, because of course she's excluded from medicine, right? Because women were not allowed to really make money. They were not allowed into professions that allowed them to make any money at that time. they have a very different set of skills.
Okay, well, hopefully Karla joins back in here. Nancy, you were talking about the political and social, well, you were talking about Tammany and that political movement, and I was asking about the double standard sporting house and what significance it had politically and socially.
Right. So women were excluded from the professions. Basically, you could get a job as a domestic or a needle worker, and you could make like about $3 a week. But an elite sex worker could make $100 a week. So Doc uses the house kind of as a charity and as a vehicle, as a way for women to make some money, and then she would help them move on to the next thing that they actually wanted to do. It was a means to an end, and she also employed a lot of other people who were not doing sex work, right? There's a whole staff, and it runs like a hotel. So the sex workers were just one part of it. And meanwhile, she's running this clinic, which is, providing women's reproductive healthcare to poor women who had a lot of trouble accessing it otherwise, and also, helping these victims of sexual violence heal. So it's a little bit of a feminist fantasy, but we have all these very elaborate ways of treating sexual assault survivors now, based on technology, based on years of psychology, study of psychology. But women have been dealing with this for millennia, and they knew things. They knew what was going to work. And I think a brothel medic would have known as much as anyone about how to help someone heal from this kind of thing. So it's about women's community, women's strength and healing, and sort of taking back the reduction of women to their sexuality and the shaming of them for it, and seeing that as a strength.
Well, such important topics and such important history to, revisit and explore. So I think that's really great to do that. That's what historical fiction does, is allow you to kind of go back to that period and re-examine and look at it through a new lens.
Mm-hmm.
Karla, I wanted to ask you about the structure of your novel. It's episodic in nature. It covers several centuries. So tell us how you structured it that way and why you structured it that way.
I think with conventional novels, they are structured like building blocks, so one after the next, and they build on one another. You can't really move any of the pieces. They're in a particular order, and you can't remove any of the pieces. So since I was dealing with 300 years, that would be an awful lot of pieces. And also the history itself, I didn't want to imply that there was any kind of innate order to it. So it was easier for me to take episodes and to take sort of mini dramas from moments in history, critical moments of history, and shine a light on those moments, and then have the whole range of characters. When you have regular chapters, regular consecutive chapters in a conventional novel, one thing builds on the next, and you have continuous characters. You have the same characters. Well, with 300 years, you don't have characters who have that kind of lifespan. So you need instead to have another connection between the parts of the novel. So with the episodic form, I was able to bring in a whole bunch of other characters. So I could bring in the Potawatomi warriors, for instance, and Spanish soldiers and robber barons and scientists and politicians. And I could pick those people who were pivotal for their time period. And one of the things that really interests me about historical fiction is that you can try to reconstruct a consciousness of that time period, and then see how all the problems of the day were kind of refracted through their brains and how they thought about things. So that was kind of nice to be free to have that many characters, that kind of cast of characters involved with the novel. And also just the idea that each one of the chapters could be self-contained. So each one could have its own narrative arc, and that I could build those chapters in such a way that they supported an overarching narrative arc. So it was a fun experiment in that sense. And I don't know, maybe the other panelists would like to comment about that because it was, I mean, I'm relatively new to this. I've done science writing for a long time, and I just find this very, very challenging to construct novels where you've got so many different ways you can build it. But that I thought the episodic structure really freed me up to include so many other characters.
I wonder if you would talk a little more about the editing process because I got on you about the episodic nature because there needed to be a common thread. There needed to be some kind of a traditional narrative. So can you talk about that process of revising and trying to understand the advice that your editor, was giving?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that is whenever you are dealing with 300 years, I think that's a problem. There's sort of a centripetal force that is knocking all the chapters out of order in any kind of consistent pattern. So the idea of having the manuscript really helped tie those pieces together. Also, the fact that I had a chronology for the chapters. So we're talking about 300 years, but also with that, I was dealing with the goddess, the Mishipeshu, the goddess figure. It was based on indigenous myth. So that was a way of kind of taking it out of the chronological order and having kind of a mythic structure around it as well. So I hope that by doing both those things, I think it was helpful in gluing all the parts together. But yeah, I think that's an inherent problem of any piece of fiction that tries to deal with that amount of time. And frequently you see this in family sagas. I don't know how many people have read those, and they can be a lot of fun, but also you have to stay within that family. And if something in the historical period you want to talk about or you think is really important in understanding the overall the story that you're trying to tell, in my case, the ecological history of the Great Lakes area, then you feel like, okay, I can't go there because well, I'm married to these figures, these characters. So yes, it was helpful for you to keep on asking me, okay, how is this stuck together? Because when you're creating this kind of thing, you want it all to work. You want all the pieces to work, so you can kind of blind yourself to the ways in which it doesn't. But I'm hopeful that at the end, I think it did kind of glue together.
And I'll just say one thing that caught my attention from what you just said is that each history, each character within each chapter, like they are a product of their own time. I mean, I think what was unique about the novel is you get their perspective from the now, what they see as the present, but then you also get Misha Peshu, who's seen all of it, so she can see change over time while the characters are living in their present day, and it can only see their one little part. So it just gives a whole new perspective on history itself. Vanessa, we have our author friend Jane who wants to know about researching pirate ships. I can't imagine you got to go on any 17th century pirate ships, 18th century, maybe you did.
So I am an immersive researcher. If I can touch it, taste it within reason, and experience it once again within reason, I will do it because it adds so much to the novel. So I actually went to Key West and got on a frigate that, or actually it was probably more like a sloop, that would have been that actually, no, it was actually probably 1700s. So it was a little late. And there are ship differences. So you make sure that when you're doing your research, because I focused on fourth rate and fifth rate frigates. They have different configurations. The steering is different. If you see somebody with like a wheel, because Pirates of the Caribbean is so cool. No. Okay.
And
No.
what they steer with.
It's called a whipstaff. So it was like,
Oh.
think of like a hockey stick that goes
Hmm.
all the way through the boat.
That's fascinating.
And that is what is steering in conjunction with all of the sails. Now, when I wrote this, I knew what all those sales names were. They're gone, guys. It's but you're a sailor. I mean, even though you're a pirate and piracy is legal in the 1600s, it doesn't become illegal until the 1700s. You have a position on that crew, and so I had to know this. I knew how to string the different topsails and all the different, because for you to have an immersive experience, to feel like you're literally standing on the canopus, I had to know all these different pieces. And if once again, just a little side note. So when I was in this world that piracy is legal, you can have a completely integrated crew. So blacks, whites, Spanish, French, everybody's on here, because their real question is not who you are, but can you do the job? But the universal currency is chattel slavery. So you'll have this integrated deck and chattel slavery in the hull, in the bowels. And I wanted to know what you could hear. So the reason I got on this frigate was so that I could go into the crew quarters and listen. You can hear everything. So if someone is moaning, crying, the slapping of the waves against the boat, you hear everything. So you choose your truth and what you're going to adhere to when you are on this pirate ship, or you be part of the pirate crew. So hopefully that helps, or just send you down, wonderful little, rabbit holes. I'm sorry for that.
It can be such a fun job, Vanessa, that you get to be so many different people and learn so many different things. It's a challenge, but it also is part of the fun. Over on YouTube, Margaret, we have some viewers over there. Margaret asks, what was the tastiest food you needed to try as a part of your research?
It was a conch. It was like a fried fritter conch thing. That was delicious. The punch, like, if you're a rum fan, they love their rum, okay? It was a good thing. And then the sops, which is the soup, which is, different types of fish, dolphin fish, which some could say is mahi maybe, as a type of soup. So it's a broth, which could be a thin broth. Maybe you get some pieces of fish, but a nice crusty bread at the bottom. That's good stuff.
I hope everyone's eating dinner, or they feel pretty hungry right now.
But as part of that, I love and immersive, and as you're somewhat becoming these pirates. Like, what are they drinking? What are they eating? What are they dressed like? That's part of the world you have to figure out when you're writing these books.
Gabriella, let's talk about sisterhood in your novel. Your two main characters are sisters, but they're also working surreptitiously against each other. So can you talk about the loyalty to each other versus the loyalty to their cause?
Yeah, so with the structure of this book and the topics I was addressing, I knew, one's an actress, one's an investigator. They're on opposite sides in that sense. However, I didn't want them to be enemies, and I wanted to kind of explore more the moral difficulties that this would present, because they're not only sisters, they're twin sisters. So they are as close as you can get when it comes to that sibling bond. They have existed on the earth for the same amount of time, give or take a few minutes depending on who's born first. And so they are just very, very close growing up. They're very different. Ada is an actress, she's a dancer, so she's more the theatrical one, and Ingrid, her sister, is more interested in politics and history and what's going on in the world, and trying to like understand. The more she learns, the more comfortable she is, because now she understands what's going on, versus Ada tries to cope with that through artistic expression. So that's how she deals with the stress of the war and things like that, versus Ingrid's way of dealing with stress is understanding as much as possible. And so they take the world in very different ways. However, they are extremely loyal to one another. They live in Arnhem with their mother. Their father has not been present in their lives, and so they've kind of only had each other and their mom, who you get to meet her later. She's a piece of work. But anyway, so that just kind of leaves them clinging to one another even more strongly. And so they spend all this time fearing the worst, coming to terms with that loss, creating these new lives for themselves, and thinking, this is how it's going to be from now on. We're going to forget everything that happened before. And now here they are back in each other's lives. And so they kind of have to ask themselves, they're pursuing their goals in terms of career and, moving on from the past and forgetting the past in a sense. But now their sisters are the sisters back. And so what's more important, this life that they've established moving forward, trying to, detach from everything that happened or reestablish that bond with your sister, regardless of what old wounds it's going to bring up, what difficulties from the past it's going to bring up, and what trouble it's going to cause in the present. Because as you said, they are on opposite sides in terms of Ada's suspected of being a communist. She doesn't know that right away, but also people in Hollywood did not think this was going to be a big deal. So as the Red Scare was starting, they're hearing whispers of, all this fear and all this concern that actors and writers and directors are inserting propaganda into films. And they said that's ridiculous because films go through, rounds and rounds and rounds of editing and production. It's like there's no way that would ever make it to the final cut if someone even tried to do it. Yes, there were, people who voted communist or supported the party or whatever the case may be, but they were like, we don't have all these spies hiding in Hollywood, basically. So they didn't think it was an issue versus Ingrid, who has been living and working in DC, working for private investigation, now hired by the House Un-American Activities Committee, sees this as a very real threat and very concerning threat and kind of sees where it could go if, it snowballs and if, there are these real issues in Hollywood that are coming up. But then she also knows what happened in the Netherlands. And so she is very concerned that this be done in a politically appropriate way with respect to, human rights and human freedom and the things we appreciate in America, because that's the reason she came to America, because she respected its democracy, respected its freedom, and didn't want, people like the Nazis, who were taking jobs and killing people for no reason. So she wants these proceedings in Hollywood and through HUAC to kind of follow the laws as they should. Did they always? No. And so as that starts to happen, then she's now questioning everything that she puts her faith in. Ada on the opposite side is questioning what she's putting her faith in because she's being told by all her studio heads, we can protect you, it's fine. Well, the minute they got caught up in something, they get dropped, they get pushed out because nobody wants to be involved. And so everyone that Ada thinks she can trust is now, not necessarily on her side, even her sister. And so it just creates a lot of ambiguity and questionable decisions and difficult situations. And they have to ask themselves, is this worth losing my sister again? Because they lost each other once, and can they do it again? Are they willing to do it again? Or are they willing to fight for it no matter what happens to, their careers, to themselves, to their lives, to each other? Are they going to put that bond first and their sisterhood first, or are they going to prioritize their careers and their individuality?
It sounds like so much tension built into that scenario. I have a twin brother, by the way, and I can relate
Ah,
to a lot of that. Very
who's older?
competitive. He's older by 19 minutes, but
Okay,
we
nice.
we can be, you know, fist to fist, hand to hand combat, just terribly mad at each other, and then 2 minutes later, it's like nothing happened. So.
Exactly. That's awesome.
Gabriella, as you were speaking, that made me think. One of the advantages historical authors have, historians have, is that perspective of understanding history. Politics today is in the news constantly, nonstop, especially with our 24/7 news cycle. While you were researching these topics, was there anything that really struck you as like, oh, so this isn't new, or oh, I'm really glad I can get some more perspective on what's happening today because of what I know happened back then?
I mean, honestly, it was just really interesting to see the parallels between, like I said, the what was happening in Nazi Germany and then what happened just few years later in a different way. 'Cause for example, Audrey Hepburn's uncle, he was a prosecuting attorney in the Netherlands. She was very close with him. And when the Nazis took over, they said, okay, you're going to enforce, Nazi law, Third Reich law now. And he said, no, I'm a Dutch citizen. I study Dutch law. I adhere to Dutch law. I'm not going to enforce those policies. And so they told him, okay, you can either Tell us who of your colleagues agree with you and are gonna, take the same position as you. Give us those names and we'll let you keep your job or you're dismissed. What did they do in Hollywood when this became an issue with communism? They said, tell us if you know anyone who's subversive or who's communist and you'll be fine. So that was a little bit chilling and a little bit frightening to see then. And, of course, and just to see how easily that can happen and how easily it can happen again and how it starts small to where people think, oh, it's not a big deal or it's just this one little thing or this one time. And if you allow it that one time, then it just goes and goes and goes. And so that was just, scary to see how often history repeats itself and how we don't seem to learn from that.
Yeah, well, but it's just so important to bring it into the light, and the more we know about it, the more we're prepared.
Definitely.
Um, Nancy, I wonder if you did cover this a little bit, but you cover some very sensitive issues, especially as it relates to violence to women. Can you talk about how difficult that was for you to discover those stories and then share them, but also how important that is? And maybe if you could even speak a little bit to the inspiration you give through the messages in your novel.
Sure. Well, the sad fact is that this kind of violence was commonplace 150 years ago, and it's commonplace now. We still blame the victim and let these predatory men, get away with it. Um, and there's this incredible reluctance to speak truth to power around this. There's so much shame around sexuality, and almost all of it falls on women. And I just get so blistering mad that I wanted to create a heroine who, even 150 years ago, because of what she goes through, can see through it. She can see the systems of power. She can see what gets lost when people are degraded this way, and through her to let the reader be able to see how these systems function to really deny women's humanity. Um, so, so yeah, I mean, I did a lot of research, and I have a doctorate in history from 40 years ago, and I have been reading and researching very deeply my whole life. But really, the inspiration for this came from very different work that I do as a yoga teacher. I work with survivors of sexual assault, and that community, the people who have been through this and what they go through to take back their life and to reclaim their full humanity, is just really inspirational to me. So I wanted to, um, imagine these women 150 years ago who had it in many ways, as much as there are similarities, they had it much worse than we do. We can earn our living, right? So here's a statistic for you. 30% of women alive in 1868 in New York did sex work at some point in their lives just to survive. 30%. The percentage of women now in the US who do sex work is about 1 to 2%. So that's how desperate the situation was. And, we have no kind of statistics for what sexual assault, the pervasiveness of sexual assault in the 19th century was. Now it's 1 in 4 women. So you can imagine it was worse then. So, I wanted to render this in a way that showed the power and the resiliency and the survival that women were able to create with each other, but also to just throw some light on the the depths of patriarchy.
Yeah, can be just so aggravating that these realities still exist. But
Mhm.
I applaud you for taking that on and sharing these stories, and so we can continue to confront them. I have more questions for our panelists. I do want to ask Nancy more about her background. Before I do, I'm going to post a link to that landing page with everyone's books. Looks like I need to update the image. It generated an image there of an older panel, but anyways, it will take you to our panelists' books despite that image. And then if anyone from the audience has questions, feel free to post those in the chat, and I'll get to as many as I can. Nancy, you said you had a PhD. I don't know your entire background in fiction writing. What
Mhm.
inspired you to write fiction, and what were some of the challenges of doing that? I think you have a background in journalism as well. So, did you go through some growing pains in figuring out how to create a fictional narrative?
A little bit, yeah. I, you know, my first instinct is to research. I mean, this book was born at the beginning of the pandemic when I here, I'm going to take a minute and just tell the story because it's really funny. My grandmother, who is a very flamboyant kind of flapper from the 1920s, grew up in New York. When I was a teenager, told me that her aunt was a madam. When I was at like 18, she told me this, and I was like, I just changed the subject. I had no idea what to say about that. But and then I had this education in history, and for years I wondered, how does a middle class girl with a huge family, a huge supportive family, end up in the sex trade? I just like I couldn't understand how that happened. So the beginning of the pandemic, I was digitizing some old family photos, and I ran across a photo of this aunt. Her name was Beatty, short for Bertha. She's kind of a spectacular broad. And I asked my father, who was then 87 years old, and he just bust a gut laughing. He thought that was the funniest thing he'd ever said, that his mother called her a madam. Like his mother was basically slut shaming her aunt. He said she wasn't a madam. She lived with a man whose wife was institutionalized, like in a hospital. And as soon as his wife died, they were married. But any woman who lived outside the bounds of married monogamy was considered a sex worker. And then my grandmother was so flamboyant, she just like promoted her to madam. But meanwhile, it's the beginning of the pandemic. It's a like I have a year, we're looking at a year at home. So I started trying to answer that question. How would a middle class girl end up in the sex trade? So my background was in political history. I was a professor for a long time. I did a lot of history of journalism. I worked as a journalist. Um, but my interests are broad. And I dug into the history of the sex trade and Tammany Hall and 19th century reproductive health, and I went down all those rabbit holes while we were stuck at home. And my background, it helps me. Like, I don't think I know anything more than the rest of these fabulous panelists know about how to read a source. I might have a little more experience like looking at an archival source and knowing how to evaluate it, but probably not any different. You like I know that if I'm reading the report of a moral reformer, to take what they have to say with a grain of salt, or a doctor who's trying to prevent the spread of syphilis but is only looking at the women and not at the men, right? Like I know how to parse that. So I think the background helps me, but really what drives good research in this context is your interest and your passion for the subject. And I definitely did have to learn how to structure a story as opposed to an argument. I have a fabulous writers group that helped me with that. And starting a story of this complexity was the hardest. These writers may understand when I say I think I wrote the opening pages 50 times.
Well, there's just so much craft that goes into the work that all of you do, from
Mhm.
the research to the narrative to all, the structure or whatever it might be to finally get to a finished novel. So, I applaud all of you for that great work that you do. Vanessa, you, just like Nancy there, are kind of sharing histories that are obscured or overlooked. Can you talk about the histories of Black women in that time and why that's important to you to bring those stories to light?
Well, it's like how much time you have because that's a lot. See? But before I do that, I just want to say about on Nancy, give any writers in the house, give yourself freedom. The I have what I call a draft version of those opening pages
Mhm.
because the opening pages are your promise to your reader of what they're about to read.
Mhm.
And so save yourself the headache, write the book, then go back and look at those first chapters because now you
Oh
know
yeah.
your story. You know what it is you want to talk about. And that makes it so much better because as you're writing, your mind, you're not very, you think you have the arcs that you want to talk about. You don't really know till you're done.
Mhm.
And you don't know what you need to deepen and what to point out, what to take. You don't know till you're done. So
Mhm.
give yourself freedom on that. Anybody who now
Well,
there are probably some magical people who could just here it is.
Most of those drafts were at the end.
You know, exactly, exactly. Like I have drafts in a drawer that if you saw me, like, does she really have an education? What's wrong with her? Now, jumping back to your question, for me, I am an engineer by trade, but my second passion was always history. My father, my mother is a literary woman, so she was always, Baldwin and Thoreau and Shakespeare and Austen and all of these great, great, great tomes. But my father is a storyteller, and he's telling me about these. I was the only girl that he used to be with his lovely Trinidadian accent, telling me about all the women who have rose up and have fought the oppression. And to me, it was lovely, these stories. As an adult, there about half of them were true. Some of them were just to get us to go to sleep. But when you find these women and then you're in school and like I said, I love history. Like I was a fanatic about Greek history, about Western civilization and all these sorts of things. And then we get these little footnotes. They may mention the Haitian Revolution, maybe, but it took me a while to figure out the Haitian Revolution is in the same context as the French Revolution, which is just a little bit, before there's the American Revolution. So it's like the whole world's in chaos during this time frame, and no one understands the other person's point of view or why they want freedom. In the American school systems, we used to learn a lot about chattel slavery, and the looking at these lives as unfortunate, looking at these lives as property and assets, and then the the separation of men and women caught up in this system. Like I think I said earlier, women, we are so busy trying to be nurturers and caregivers and all these sorts of things. We never have the time to write things down. So these beautiful women who are more than slavery, like Jacquot Delahaye, is a pirate captain, not just a pirate. She rises to be a pirate. She commands a ship. She's a navigator. She can actually drive a frigate. She knows how to launch cannons and things like this, how to target different boat vessels. All of these things that one has to master in order to be that person. But we don't hear about her. All the stories of enslavement are extremely important. But when you tell a people that this is all you ever were, and you were in need of being rescued or legislation to be passed for you to have freedoms, you can limit the growth that a person can have, or even their ability to dream. So for me, it is a passion project to go and find these women, queens that not only are queens in the Caribbean, but literally are treated as queens on the world stage. Entrepreneurs who have built businesses across the West Indies while chattel slavery is still going on, entertaining kings, actually being a mistress of one, but that's a whole nother story. But there are all these other lives. There's art, there's business, there's all these other constructs that are on the fringes of this massive sin that's happening that we call chattel slavery, or the great transport from Africa to the Western world. I want to find these women. I want to bring them to you. And I want to bring them to you in a way that shows the weaknesses, show their strengths. I'm not looking for magical Negroes. I am looking for people who did something because they found the strength within themselves to be that girl, to be the person who was going to lead a rebellion, to be the person who was going to rescue a town. I think we need those stories. And as we are living in a context, we all write historical fiction, right? But we're living in a present modern day world, and one that doesn't actually want to recognize women, the histories and the importance, or even the allyship amongst communities. We don't see that enough, or we don't hear that enough. Right now, it's all about tearing people down and ostracizing and those types of things. So if I can write a narrative that uncovers some woman that has done something phenomenal, that shows you that she did it in a community type aspect where it's looping all the people and all the goals and all the dreams together to push for that one thing, those are the stories I want to tell. And so I hope you check out my catalog, vanessariley.com. But that's what excites me about history and bringing those to you.
Well, it's such a great message, and your passion just comes out right out of you there. So that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Karla, I want to ask you about more about Mishipeshu, specifically about cultural differences between yourself and the history that you're writing about. You mentioned the Potawatomi. We have this mythology that comes from Native American culture. What kind of research did you do into that culture, and how comfortable were you conveying it in this story?
I guess I should start first with just describing the difference between my character and the indigenous mythical creature. So, Mishipeshu is part of Odawa culture and part of Great Lakes indigenous culture in general. And the creature, which is historically and culturally the part that Mishipeshu played, was protector of the rivers and the waterways, and also helped rule the underworld. So there were many functions and features of Mishipeshu within the indigenous culture. And just in terms of physical, what they look like, it was just tremendously imaginative. So it was, Mishipeshu is also called the underwater panther, and she has a head like a panther and claws like a panther, but she's got fish's scales, and then she's got horns like a bison and a tail like a serpent. So all these different strengths of different animals are put together in this one myth. Has some similarities with Mishipeshu and how it's portrayed in indigenous legend. Mine is a goddess, and mine's a shapeshifter, and mine's also she is, because she's a goddess, she's within a pantheon, and the pantheon of gods and goddesses. And so she is able to, she has, it's sort of a coming of age story that's also parallel to the narrative structure. And we see and how she, as she's becoming more and more aware of the damage being done to her world, her rivers and the world around her and the wildlife, there's just sort of a growing anger as as she becomes aware of what's being done and the damage. So it's kind of her rage you see developing as the narrative goes on, but also it's complicated because people are part of this environment. So she kind of wants to bring them back into a harmonious relationship with nature. So yes, I mean that there is a tension between the two, but I think it makes clear in the book the distinction between the two, the literary character and what it's based on. I also worked with a member of the Potawatomi tribe who was very helpful in helping me with names of things. There were a lot of names that I found from dictionaries I was dealing with at the Notre Dame Library, and nothing against the Notre Dame Library; they've got great resources, but these are 19th century sources, and they're wrong. They are really wrong. So it was wonderful to have somebody to say, you can't say that. Or I had names that I had found in this dictionary. There weren't even names. So it was just great to have somebody who could go through and correct those things. Also, the topography and things that I hadn't even thought about. And Vanessa, you were talking about how you like to envision what is going on, and you kind of have to, because you got to place your reader within this world, and that's kind of fun. I think everybody here just really enjoys that whole process of positioning your reader, but it was a real dislocation to find that here I had thought, okay, the river looks this way, and so the fort is positioned on the river bank, and he's like, looking at that section, he said, wait a second, they can just walk across there. And really? I didn't know that. He said, yeah, well, before they put all the dams in there, yeah, you could do that. So it was just sort of like, really opened a new world for me in that respect. So Yes, it's you can say, oh, this is kind of borrowing, but it's also sort of deep appreciation for what was before. You know, that the whole ecosystem that was here in the Great Lakes area was all harmonious and healthy. And so we've got to learn from what came before in order to bring it back into that kind of ecosystem and one hopes some sort of balance. But yeah, it was really educational and just to kind of get a picture into that world, not only sort of its distortions in secondary literature and what people thought at the time of Native American culture, and then to hear a representative from Native American culture say, well, actually, no, that's not how it was. And really kind of trying to tap into some sources that were primary sources that were a little bit harder to kind of tease out what the meaning was of some of those from that time period. But again, and it felt good to be telling a story of people who nobody's telling that story, or very few people are telling it. And it's much needed.
I think you bring up another very important element of your craft, and that's correcting anachronisms. Like you can't just look at a Wikipedia page. You really have to dive deep into the history and then interrogate it to figure out, well, was this true? Why was it written this way? Who wrote it? And so I'll applaud you as well for really doing that extra work. And can I just say your cat was almost like an underwater panther sitting
I
there.
thought the same thing.
I make her wear that costume, actually. She's a tabby.
Aw.
No, yeah, she's right here appreciating all this.
Well, we're up against the end of the hour. I didn't get to a few questions hidden in here. Greg, you and I can talk more later about transitioning from research to story. But before we end, well, first of all, let me thank our panelists. This has been fantastic. Congratulations on your amazing books. I want to thank everyone for attending. We couldn't do this if we didn't have anyone attending, and I hope all of you will either buy the books or get them from your library or ask your local bookstore to carry them or tell friends about them, post about them on social media, anything you can do to support these authors and their work. Before we wrap things up, I always like to ask about the value of historical fiction. Karla, Nancy, you both have backgrounds in history and in research and in journalism, but you decided a story was a better way to share this history. So Nancy, let's start with you. What is the value of narrative, the value of historical fiction?
Oh, to connect to the human side of things. I mean, just to very briefly address Greg's question, an argument is driven by intellect and a story is driven by heart. It's character driven, it's lived experience. So it just brings these issues close to someone. And I love reading it. I love learning history through fiction. So here we are, writing it too.
Very well summarized. Vanessa, how about you? What's the value of historical fiction?
Historical fiction gives you a safe way to revisit history. Um, History, in my perspective, history can be joyful, it can be exciting, it can be dangerous, it can be scary, it can be very sad. You get, I don't want to say an arm's length, but you get a seat in what happened and historical fiction done well. You get a seat at the table. You get to be in the conversations. You get to be in the rooms where it happens. And I think that is the importance, because so many conversations, so many pieces of history are ignored, or you read through things that were written with bents that are not necessarily true, but fit a certain mode or line that the majority or the people in power wanted you to know, wanted you to think about that. So Karla, I felt you. I think Nancy, you've also said some of the things you have to say. Is this true or it's not? You know, oftentimes I'm reading emancipation work, and you get very different perspectives of people who own people wanting reparations. Just let that sit for you just a second.
Mhm.
But you need that voice. And many people are not going to pick up a nonfiction book. It's a sad thing because I love nonfiction books. Those are the things that inform the world. Those are the things that I get questions, and then I take those questions that I have in my head, and I create these characters who are going to live in that moment and are going to expand on those questions, and hopefully will leave something with the reader to make them want to learn more, to make them ask questions, even think about models in society of what's going on now. What would these people do? That's the power of historical fiction, to just put you there safely, and help you ask the deeper questions.
Yeah, definitely so much power in giving the readers that experience of being there and seeing how things happened. Gabriella, why do you write historical fiction?
Echoing all these fantastic answers, but I think historical fiction reminds us that the human experience is universal, because I think it's very easy to feel like, oh, these things happened so long ago, and oh, they happened in another country, and they're nothing like me, I'm nothing like them, but that is not true. We all go through, struggles and joys and hardships and triumphs and sorrows. And I think being able to explore those through other people's experiences that you might not be like you, it helps you relate to them more, learn more about yourself, learn more about them, and more about the world and our history and cultures and just all those things that are so important. And there was actually a really interesting thing that somebody left a review of the Star Society, I think the audiobook or something, and she said she felt like she was backstage in history. And I think that is such a cool way to look at it, because I was a dancer for a really long time growing up. And so, as is my character. But when you're in the audience, you see the performance, you see how beautiful it is, everything's flowing smoothly, everything looks great. When you're backstage, you've been there for all the rehearsals, you've been there when it was messy. You're seeing, the lighting guy struggling to get the spotlight right, and he does it in the nick of time. You're seeing the quick change happening in the wings. You're seeing, the bloody feet that come out of the point shoes. So you see the good, the bad, the ugly, and then you rejoice at the end because you got through the show and everybody's just so excited, so proud, so emotional. And so I think historical fiction is that backstage seat to history, because you're not just seeing the picture that's been painted for you, you're seeing every single side of what happened, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think, again, good historical fiction has the ability to do that and to help us understand everything that goes into these experiences that shaped those people and then have shaped the world we have today.
Well, what a great analogy. Did that just come to you, or you used that?
No, somebody commented on that and
Uh,
it got me thinking. And I was like, she just said something about it. She felt like she was backstage. And so that just made me thinking, I thought of what it is like to be backstage and how that does relate to historical fiction. I was like, that is just so cool. I love that idea.
yeah. Well, Karla, I'll let you wrap things up. Why did you write this as a historical novel? What's the value in it?
Oh, that's kind of tough, Colin, because actually I didn't read historical fiction. I loved history. And so I would read lots of history. And honestly, for many years I thought to myself, why would I read historical fiction? Why would I do that? But now that I've done it and now that I want to do more of it, I do understand that there's a limit to what history can tell you. And definitely in the whole arena of motivation. So when you read history, even well-written history, there's sort of a break between the events as they unfold and how people are act out those things in the events. And so I think that this medium, this genre, allows people to immerse themselves in all the details and all the complexities, and then try and understand. Well, like Vanessa's character at the deck of the ship, what is she thinking of? What's going through her mind? And what does she know about what's cartography in her head? What's going on there? I think historical fiction just puts you at the helm of the ship. You have to, with your character, you have to see through their eyes, and I think it's a good interrogator of history itself. It's a
Mhm.
good maybe corrective of history, so that we don't see it as just sort of a progression of facts or events. That they're real people, and we have to understand why they made the decisions that they made in these contexts.
Well, I totally agree with all of that, and I'm a convert just like you, Karla. I started out with just history. Well, thanks again to everyone. This has been a lot of fun, and I will see all of you next time on What's New in Historical Fiction. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Thanks,
us.
Colin.
You.
And thank everyone for coming.
Guys.
See ya.
Bye.